So if you read the news or you follow the economic forecasting that's out there, you might have come across this idea that a quote unquote market adjustment is coming, that within the next year to 2 years, there will be a market crash of some sort. And of course, that's nothing new. People always predict that. Seems to be a cottage industry out there. But so I was reading one of these articles, kind of asked myself, how will this impact the retro game collecting market? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's a kind of very interesting question. Because retro gaming and game collecting as we know it has not experienced this kind of economic test. If you think back to 2008, the last global economic crisis, the whole eBay slash influencer driven YouTube, gaming collecting culture, whatever you want to call it, was still in its infancy. And back then I was buying games and had a collection of some sort, but I wasn't really in the community at that point. And, I didn't really notice anything in particular going on. Maybe if you were paying more attention around that time, you have a different perspective. But I think the standard model here is that, in some kind of economic crisis, people will have less disposable income to use to pursue the hobby. Some people will try to sell their high-value games to make up for drops in income or liquid assets, and then the prices will drop. There won't be this mad rush to buy up classic games, and of course, prices will fall. I think there's obviously merit to that. And, I look at the baseball card example from around 2008. And, of course, if you follow the channel, you know that one of my good friends is a big baseball card collector and started building the collection that you saw in one of those videos around 2008. And what we saw then in the baseball card market was that, iconic items like those Mickey Mantle cards, they depreciated a little bit, but they maintained a good percentage of their value and they recovered, whereas other items tanked, particularly mass-produced items, gimmicky items. They just, bottomed out in value and were much, much slower to regain anything of the value they had before the crash. Now, while some of this I think will hold true for video games, I think retro game collecting has a few factors that may make it different in how it responds as a hobby to a potential economic crisis. I think the first thing is that video games are usable. They're usable items, and they give people pleasure. It's not a card sitting in a closet. It's not a coin that you can kind of sell for its, metal value as opposed to, any kind of numismatic value that may have dropped. I think people just enjoy games. So there may not be a quick rush to sell off these games in a crisis. And I think some of the new hardware that's come out, whether it's the Retron 5 or console mods or something like the Polymega, if and when it ever comes out, it may give people reason to hold on to their physical games for a little bit longer than they otherwise may have. And of course, this will lead them to, I think, hold their value, either to the person who doesn't sell them because they have some kind of emotional attachment, makes them feel good in tough times, things like that, or to the market because, again, you can still buy these things, they can still be played. Because of this, I think, obviously, in a crisis, the value will decline on all of these collectors' games, but it will be more gradual, I think, than what you may have seen in other hobbies. And I think certain proven titles, and I think this is where, the analogy to the baseball card hobby and the Mickey Mantles and the top cards, I think, Panzer Dragoon Saga, will keep its value. It may go from 700 to 620 or 520 or something like that, but it will, it's not going to tank below that. Whereas I think more mass-produced titles are currently overvalued based on nostalgia and the kind of YouTube culture that talks them up, and they'll see the more dramatic declines. If you want to think about it this way, maybe a Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation versus a working designs game like Lunar or Alundra or something like that, that is a little bit rarer. There will be some exceptions, though. I think things like, newer quote unquote collectible rare titles from Limited Run and, companies in their ilk, they may take a harder hit only because they don't have the track record and they're artificially rare. And I think people might say, well, I'm not going to concern myself, with these games. I think, they are different than, say, the rare Sega Saturn game. Now, of course, there is a caveat to all of this, and that is, I'm thinking of a recession, a, decline, but not like a Great Depression, not a global catastrophe. And I think, obviously, if that were to happen, all of this analysis would be thrown out the window. But assuming we see something, hopefully not as bad as 2008, but sort of in that direction, I think these are kind of the thoughts that we can have about how retro gaming may or may not respond. I do, however, think there are some unpredictable points to all of this. And I think the first is, this may be an uneven recovery for society in general and also for the market. I'm not saying that 2008 was an even recovery. It wasn't. But I think now in any major crash, 2020 or beyond, I think it's going to play into the larger kind of workplace social revolution of job automation going on. I think that a crash now might be an impetus for a lot of employers to push harder on automation than they're already doing. And this could reduce workforces, reduce jobs and ultimately reduce disposable income in the economy that people use to kind of fuel the retro game boom that we've seen. But I also think at the same time, there's going to be a smaller group that will sort of profit from this. High-value employees of tech companies who are working to produce the social transformation. I think chances are, they are going to be in the age range of what I call the first wave retro gamer, someone who got into the hobby as a young adult between 2005 and 2018-19. And I think, they're going to do well and they're going to be highly paid, probably better so than they are paid now. And I think they could use that financial muscle to buy up a lot of the inventory that people are selling, again, to maybe replace or supplement income. So I think while the prices may experience a gradual decline, like I said, I don't think anyone's going to be buying Albert Odyssey on the Saturn for $40. I still think there's going to be a huge shift in top-tier game ownership, and I think there's going to be a huge share of high-value games being more and more concentrated towards the top of the market as you have people who have the retro gaming interest probably, coming into more and more income, doing well, benefiting from the social change, and being able to kind of buy up all the things that maybe they haven't at this point. Now, the second unpredictable element to all of this is how the crash is going to affect the game industry as a whole. Now, for a long time, people have been predicting an 80s-style game crash, and it's never happened, but I think a major economic event could change how society engages with video games. Now, like I said, less disposable income will lead to fewer sales of hardware and games more generally. And I think, if people are squeezed enough, the predatory freemium gaming models that dominate now may drive people away from gaming if they really need to make every dollar count. Now, this could actually, I think, benefit retro gaming in the sense that people are looking for traditional games that don't have these predatory economies. And if there are easy ways to play these older games, whether that's, newer consoles that can play them or ways to easily hook them up to your 4K television if you still have the old systems, I think the retro games could actually benefit. And that would kind of, again, make the drop in value even more gradual than it would otherwise be. But I think if the crash is severe enough, people could shift away from gaming generally and towards other forms of digital escapism like streaming or other social media platforms if they're a better economic value. Now, I kind of don't think that that's going to happen. I would kind of side with, gaming still being a major outlet for a lot of people, but again, depends on the severity of what happens. So I think there are two ways to play this moment if you are a collector. If you have a lot of high-value games, What you could do is you could sell now at the height of the current market as we know it, and then shift whatever gains that you've made into other asset classes when the economy tanks. I mean, if you're holding on to three sealed, um, Magic Knight Rayearth games, or again Panzer Dragoon Saga, you could sell them, take the money, put it in CD or something, wait until the market crashes, and you could buy some mutual funds or stocks or something like that. I mean, that is one strategy, or use it to put a down payment on a piece of real estate if that market bottoms out. So you could do that, or you could hold on to these games and hope that the true classics survive. And I personally think that they will over time. And I think you could perhaps profit from a buying binge when as economic power gets more and more concentrated at the top. I think you will see people who get that six-figure bonus and maybe want to buy up your collection. It's more of a riskier bet than the former. But again, I do kind of think that certain games, the games that we know are the holy grails, I don't think they're going to go anywhere as far as value goes. Now, of course, if money isn't a problem and, you either have some cash or you're not worried about finances, or you're, one of those gaming one percenters that I've described here, of course, you could really use any kind of crash to buy up games at, perhaps modest but nonetheless meaningful discounts. But whatever the future holds, and whenever the economic challenge comes, I think that crisis, whatever it is, will give us some valuable information about retro game collecting as a hobby. We will know which games can survive the test of time and which games will establish themselves as the truly desirable cultural artifacts. And we'll also know which games were overvalued and by how much. And I think most importantly, we'll learn whether and to what extent the YouTube-fueled collecting communities of the past 10 years were a passing fad, or whether they are a lasting feature of mature millennial culture.